Hi, I'm Glenn Mitchell,
And I'm Janet Mitchell.
and welcome to the Turtle River Railroad. We've been in garden railroading for about 15 years, having started when we lived in San Jose. We were introduced to G-scale at a large-scale train show, and also when we visited the train shop in Santa Clara. We've been we were armchair small-scale railroaders for several years before we became interested in G-scale, and the size of G-scale and the concept of G-scale of being a little more loose and not necessarily so tied to fidelity to scale was interesting to us. The whimsical part to some extent was interesting, and just the many facets of garden railroading. We combine modeling with the gardening, with electronics, and especially meeting other modelers. One of our favorite things is being able to show our railroad to people and to visit other people's railroads.
My favorite part of the railroad is building the buildings and designing the vignettes, the story behind why there are trains, that the people who would live around the railroad. But I really do enjoy all the neat people we've met, both garden railroaders and just the public that comes to events that our club does. We've met some really interesting people we would never have known if we weren't garden railroaders.
Our our current railroad here is probably fairly typical of garden railroaders' experience. We started with a loop of track in the house, and that loop of track moved outside, and then we decided to have a little more formal layout and created a layout that's about half of the railroad that you see here. And it was almost exactly a year ago that we decided to expand that railroad, which was a loop-to-loop railroad, into the other half of the yard to create two interconnected separate loops, so we could do a little more continuous running for display purposes.
I do pretty much all of the buildings other than the ones that are really the mine things. If they're directly related to the train and mine, then that's Glenn's part. The rest of it is mine. There are some that are strictly kits, and some that I have built totally from scratch. I say I copy well. If the cantina on the Mexican town was a painting on Friend's wall, I sat there one night looking at it and went, oh, that's what I want on the railroad. Got a photo of it, and from that, built the cantina. So.
Railroad-wise, the track is code 250 track, except for the mine line, which is LGB, because I had a supply of LGB tracks, so I used it. The bridges, with the exception of the iron bridges which were purchased, are all scratch built by myself. So the bridge work and the electronics and weathering rolling stock are probably my favorite parts of the hobby as far as the construction part of it goes. As far as conventions go, we've attended conventions almost every year for the last probably 7 years, with the exception of the ones that have been back east. We just haven't been able to make the ones in Cincinnati and Florida. But we've been to ones in Santa Clara, Denver, Seattle, and so forth.
And have some good friends that we have met through the conventions. That on our last trip back east, we stopped in Missouri and visited with a couple that we had met. That they're neat people that you meet through this hobby. For anyone getting started, I would say be flexible, because you are going to come up with so many more ideas as you go along than you have when you start out. Leave space to add new things.
And don't be afraid to change something if you need to remove something, take something out to make way for a better idea or an idea that you like better. That's part of the fun.
My name is Bill Nagel. The name of this railroad is the Vesterwalde Güterzug. What that means essentially is it's a railroad that represents the Vesterwalde area of Germany. The reason I chose that name for the railroad, I spent 10 years in Europe, in Germany specifically, married a German girl, so I was very familiar with the German transportation system, especially the railroads. So I decided when we started this railroad that rather than have the same type of a railroad that most guys have, you know, early Western United States, that type, I thought I'd just be a little different. European is not better, it's just different. So I thought it would be kind of novel to have something like that. And that's what we started. We started it actually about 10 years ago in another house location. Then we moved to this location in 2004, and we've been working here on this ever since. Everything was just bare ground here, and what you see here is what we've done in the last 3 years. Well, I think what I like to do is create the diorama effect as much as possible. And I have a lot more I want to do here. I like the idea of little European villages. I like the idea of European, German if you will, industrial areas. And that's what you'll see on the railroad here. So, and of course I like the rolling stock and the locomotives to be all typical European also. I might add that the era that I represent here is from 1935 to about 1950. So when you have that time frame, that means I can have German military, I can have the Umpapa, I can have the castles. This all takes place during wartime, and I represent those aspects on the layout here. In other words, you can visualize the German military at the same time they're fighting a war. They're over here drinking beer in a beer joint, or they're participating in a reenactment with knights in armor. Well, I'll tell you what, I'm a firm believer in the KISS principle, keeping it simple. So I decided to put 4 separate loops in the railroad. So there are 2 intermingled dog bones, 1 great big perimeter run, and an overhead run, plus a cog train run. And every one of them are separate. And I have a minimum amount of turnouts because they just cause trouble. The other thing I've done is I use exclusively track power, and I have soldered every connection on the railroad just for fear of, you know, losing power to the tracks. I have, on the railroad right now, there's about 30 pieces of rolling stock. I own about probably 50, but you can't put them all on. One of my future projects, and I'm just researching it now, is to be able to run 2 trains. A lot of guys have multiple locomotives, but they haven't got enough track for everything. But I have a circuit now to where I can run 2 locomotives on a single track, and they'll never collide with one another. So that's going to be one of my up-and-coming projects. I also want to put a cable car up here someplace, running up to that mountain. That'll come next year, maybe before the convention. I enjoy it. I enjoy people coming in and having a good time. I've helped other guys at Christmas as an example, and just to see the expression on the kids' faces makes it 100% worth it. That's the positive feedback that I get out of it. And my wife enjoys it too. We have a fire out here, and kind of a family thing. Well, again, we started, this was bare land in 2004. When we moved in here, as a matter of fact, I came through the gate, took one look at the backyard, and said, we'll buy it. And my wife said, don't you think we ought to look at the house too? I wanted the backyard mainly. but we've been happy here. And like I say, it was flat ground, and I did all the work myself. My cardiologist said I needed exercise, so the wife and I did all this ourselves.
We're the Ories, Phil and Wanda, and the name of our railroad is the Grizzly Flats Division of the Denver and Rio Grande Western Railway. We started the train layout in January of '04 after seeing Dan Hoag's layouts in the open house in '03. And we actually finished it by May of '04 in time for the pond tour. It took a lot of time, nights and all day, and we had the pond professionally done, and the walls were professionally painted, but the rest of it we did ourselves. The layout consists of 200 feet of approximately, or a little more, of stainless steel track with, we've got track powered, it's dog bone style. We have a couple of turnouts, and I'm planning on putting a third turnout in before the National Convention. One end of the dog bone runs across around the koi pond with a bridge and waterfall, and the other end goes around a grapefruit tree. We have 2 car barns that we put the cars in. And there's 4 additional bridges on the layout, and we finished the layout, including all the buildings and everything, in 5 months, working day and night.
The mural around the pond suggests kind of a tropical scene, and at night there's a glowing volcano. And then this scene transitions into a southwest desert scene with a canyon and buttes similar to Monument Valley. It then becomes a southwest desert town, then into hills with a mine. On the adjoining wall, the mountains give way to a farm scene, and then there's actually a city scene looms behind the car barns. We actually have about 24 kit-built buildings, and they're dating from the 1800s and is the early 1930s.
We currently have a mogul engine with 5 Sierra passenger cars and a Hudson, which we pull freight with. Although we are steam era railroad, I still love diesel and purchased a couple of SD45s to pull freight. All our equipment is G-scale. Wanda and I built the layout. She even laid cement and mortar with a broken arm. Both of us put together the buildings. Now I mostly work on the layout.
Phil's actually, my favorite part of the layout is just sitting out here with the train running and listening to the waterfalls, and I guess kind of feeding my fish. But Phil really likes to run the railroad and just coming up with more ideas how to increase this layout in such a small, limited space that we have available. When children come, I often have a little slip made up to see if they can find the different animals and the different people, and it's really fun to watch their reaction to this whole train environment.
We belong to the West Valley Garden Railway Society. Since completion, we have had 7 open houses, which included garden railroad, pond, and neighborhood tours. If you love trains and gardening, garden railroading is a wonderful outdoor hobby.
that the buildings have either been scratch built, kit bashed, or have been hand built. You know, as I stated earlier, my layout was built predominantly to run live steam, but I also have provisions to run battery power and electric power. But you know, live steam is my preference. I'm hoping that as you see this video, that many people have put a lot of time and effort into it to make it pleasant and rewarding for visitors. And I'm certainly looking forward to the 2008 convention, and hopefully you'll come visit my home and that we'll meet you at the convention.